All right, so we are recording now. At this time, Curtis and I would like to give you a little bit of background about rain gardens and how they could benefit you, as well as the new rain garden subsidy program that the City of Peterborough is offering. So we're briefly going to talk about rain gardens. What are the benefits? Why would you want one? The program itself, how to get yourself started, to be prepared for the program, next steps, and then the live Q&A. So to provide a little bit of background, some of you might already be familiar with the term stormwater, but some of you might not. So stormwater is basically water from a storm. I really liked this definition from that website. Any precipitation that falls from a sky, including rain, hail, and snow, is considered stormwater. And this is in particular in urban areas where a lot of the natural environment has been altered. So especially in Southern Ontario, where a lot of our wetlands have disappeared over time, there's been a lot of deforestation. So the water that would normally flow from the sky and down into the earth and be absorbed by tree roots or by wetlands is no longer able to do that in all cases. So it can become stormwater runoff in urban areas where it runs off of rooftops, roads, driveways. We call those impervious areas because the water can't actually penetrate into the ground there. And then it runs off into our storm sewers and directly into our waterways. Curtis, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's only 25% of the stormwater runoff in Peterborough that's actually treated before it enters our waterways. So
yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Super, thank you. So most of that stormwater runoff goes untreated. So it can pick up things like oil and grease, garbage, plastics, you name it, that exist on our roads, and bring those directly into our waterways. So that's a bit of a problem in urban areas. For example, that was a major problem in Peterborough in 2004 and 2002 when we had massive flooding. In fact, I think the 2004 flood is considered one of the worst in Ontario within the last 50 years or so. And at that time, it was a lot of rainfall, and other than into the stormwater sewage system, the water didn't really have a good place to go. So that water, in fact, started to pool and cause flooding. There was a lot of damage to property, and that was not a good thing. This is just a little bit of context as well. So plants are great for absorbing water. In the middle there is Kentucky bluegrass, which is a common turf grass that you might have in your front yard. And it's actually not very good at absorbing stormwater. It has tiny little roots. And so a lot of that water actually will still run off of Kentucky bluegrass and other turf grasses. By contrast, things like pale purple coneflower, blazing star, Indian grass, and lots of native species of grasses and plants have really deep growing root systems that can actually absorb that stormwater and help to bring it back to the groundwater, to recharge groundwater, and they clean the water as well. So very beneficial in urban areas. So what is a rain garden? A rain garden is a garden that is designed for function. So it is particularly for absorbing stormwater. It has a nice bowl shape as shown here. Sometimes there's stone in the bottom of the rain garden, but that's not always necessary. And it also has an inlet and an outlet to really direct the water through the garden. So the inlet allows water to come in from usually a rooftop, especially in the case of the subsidy program. Sometimes the inlet can also direct water off of roads or driveways, and that brings the water into the garden where it might sit 24 to 48 hours before being absorbed into the ground by those lovely native plants. And in the event of a really extreme rainfall, you might want that water to flow out of the garden, and that's where the outlet is really important because it gives the water a place to go if there are really heavy volumes of it. So rain garden benefits, you might be here for a variety of reasons, and you might be looking for any one of these benefits, but they do tend to provide them all, which is great. So number one, reducing flood risk, which is why the city and Green Up are particularly interested in them. They're also low maintenance. I say low maintenance, but not no maintenance. If you want your garden to look nice, it is like a perennial garden in that you might be wanting to remulch every so often, do some weeding, make sure that the garden continues to look nice. That being said, weeds do not impact the function of a rain garden. So even if they're there, the garden will still be absorbing the stormwater, which is great. But you will need to maintain the inlet and the outlet of the garden to make sure there's not a lot of leaf litter or garbage that's accumulating in there and negatively impacting how the garden works. Rain gardens can help you save money. They can provide shade. They provide habitat and biodiversity for lots of native pollinator species and wildlife. They can add beauty to a property, such as in this case of an East City rain garden. And depending on what you put in your garden, they can also provide a privacy screen, especially with taller growing shrubs and trees. So I'm going to hand it over to Curtis to talk specifically about the rain garden subsidy program offered by the city.
Yeah, so I guess the main question that we have there is kind of why are we running the pilot? So we just kind of thought this was a good opportunity to educate people about stormwater management in general and just kind of engage the community. A lot of people aren't familiar with stormwater. They just kind of think, okay, the rain falls and it goes somewhere and that's it, but kind of gives us an opportunity to educate people. It's mutually beneficial, so it provides funding to residents in order to install them, but then it also takes some of the strain off the actual stormwater management system that the city provides. It also helps treat stormwater at the source, so rather than that water flowing overland and getting into our catch basin, it just is stopped right at the source so that it doesn't even end up in the stormwater system. And it just helps imitate the natural hydrological cycle like Jen was talking about, which has a variety of environmental benefits. And like we said before, only 25% of the city is currently being treated with some sort of stormwater management system. So this kind of allows us to put another layer of protection in those areas that haven't been developed for stormwater management yet. So that's kind of the reason why we're running the pilot. How does the program work? If you visited the website at all, it's laid out there, but just to kind of go through it, applicants will take part in a pre-approval process. So that just kind of saves people time so they don't get too far ahead in the process before they kind of determine whether or not they're eligible or not. So the pre-approval process is a set of simple questions, and then you will be navigated over to a tool which you will size the roof area that you're capturing. So we're focusing on roof areas just because it's the easiest way to go to be able to quantify the estimates and be able to keep it fair for everyone. So a section of your roof is going to go to a downspout, and you're just going to have to determine that section of the roof and then the downspout location, as well as the rough rain garden location and the dimensions of the rain garden. So once you're pre-approved, you'll get an email once you've done that process, and that'll direct you to a link that has the upload stuff. So the application that you're gonna have to go through and part of the workshop that Green Up's gonna be hosting is gonna go through some of the details. So one of them is gonna involve a drainage test. One of them is gonna involve a slope calculation. The aerial tool that I just talked about with determining the roof area that you're getting, and just attendance for the Green Up workshop, as well as a design sketch. So just kind of, basically it's gonna be 2 documents. It's gonna be the aerial and then your design sketch, and that's gonna have all the information on it. So you just either upload that to the links that we're gonna send you, or you can drop it off in person, provided we can be in person anytime soon. I guess that's to be seen. And then once you've been approved for your full application, you'll get the green light to go ahead and install the garden. Once you're installing the garden, you're gonna have to take progress photos just before, during, and kind of after the installation, and keep all the receipts for the materials that you use. And then once you've provided that information, you'll get your check for the subsidy estimate that you got approved. And we were talking about this earlier. You can also, if you wanted to hire a landscaper to do it, that will still count. You just submit the material that the landscaper used, and that'll still count towards your subsidy. And just to be clear, so we're offering a maximum of $500. So you should get an estimate of that amount when you're going through the pre-approval process. It's based on how much roof you're capturing and how big your garden is. We're doing up to 50 people this year. And yeah, so the way the calculation works, without getting into the nitty gritty of it, if you're capturing 1.5 cubic meters of water, you're basically guaranteed to get the $500. If you have a larger roof, you might have to make it more because we don't want these rain gardens overflowing. And if you have a smaller roof, we're still going to give you some money, but if you're not capturing that 1.5 cubic meters of volume, you'll just get a little bit of a reduced amount for the subsidy. And yeah, that's kind of how the overview of the program is going to work. It's kind of
Would you like the next slide there, Curtis?
Sure.
All right. So I can take it from here and then I'll pull you back in.
Okay.
Here. So to get started, this is sort of what Curtis was mentioning. You're going to want to figure out where you can locate your rain garden. So it is crucially important because we don't want any issues with basement flooding or causing any issues with your foundation of your house or anyone else's, that you site your rain garden 3 meters or 10 feet away from any building foundation. You'll notice in the image on this slide that it looks very close to the house, but that front porch doesn't have a foundation. So in this case, that's totally fine. And if your front porch doesn't have a foundation, then it's okay if your garden is close to your porch, as long as it's 10 feet or 3 meters away from the foundation of your house, and also any neighbors' houses as well. You also want to make sure that you have a nice slope away from your house so that the water will go in the intended direction. We know that water always flows uphill to downhill, so we just want to make sure that that water is traveling away from your house and not going to cause any issues. You also want to have a downspout off of your roof that you can direct the water into for your rain garden. And sometimes when we've worked with homeowners, they've had issues with water pooling on their property during certain times of year. So sometimes that can be a good location to put in a rain garden as well. So this image here just shows what we're looking for when we're talking about slope. You will see on the left, that is a lovely slope away from the house, which is what we're looking for. There's a bit of a process to calculate this for the rain garden subsidy program and make sure that your slope is reasonable away from your house. In the image on the right, you'll notice that the slope is towards the house, and that is where it could be a bit of an issue because the water will actually go towards your foundation, and that's what we want to avoid in the case of this program. Before we go any further, I'd also like to mention that it is the law to call Ontario One Call, or you can submit an application online to figure out any utilities that you might have on your property. It is free to call Ontario One Call or submit online, and it usually takes 1 to 2 weeks to have the utilities cited on your property. I would always give 2 weeks to be safe. So this is probably step one. Once you've submitted your pre-approval, you're going to want to call Ontario One Call to figure out where your utilities are. And this is really to avoid any issues like hitting a gas line, or if you hit your internet line, that would probably be an issue right now during COVID. So we really want to make sure that we know where those utilities are, and that if you're digging, that you can safely dig around them. Curtis, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about calculating roof area.
Yeah, so just like I was talking about before, we kind of want an idea of the roof area that you're capturing. So we've created an online tool to help people do that. So we've made, while you're doing your pre-approval process, there's a link that gets you to the tool. There's also a link that we've provided that gives you an instructional video on how to use it, because we understand that not everyone is tech savvy and it's kind of hard to go through some of this stuff sometimes. So once you've determined which roof section is going to the downspout that you're planning on installing the rain garden downstream of, you'll just isolate that section using the tool. So just watch the video, I go through it in depth. It's basically just a matter of clicking a polygon tool. You click the four corners or whatever shape of the roof that you're capturing it'll spit out the area, and then you just kind of show us with a line tool, I'm 3 meters at least away from my property, and roughly dimension in the location where you're putting the rain garden. So that's all explained in the video, and if you need help with that, please reach out to me. I understand not everyone's great at doing stuff like that, so I can definitely give you a hand with that if you're having problems.
Thanks, Curtis. And we will make sure to include the link for the YouTube video that walks through this in the chat shortly after the presentation. So Curtis, back to you as well, rain garden size and depth.
Yeah, so just for simplicity's sake, for this subsidy, we just wanted to get, like I said, the 1.5 cubic meters of rain that we had talked about, just to kind of make it fair for everyone. So the way that's calculated is just a regular volume calculation. So your length, your width, and your depth. In the application guide, it shows you that you're going to want to take the dimensions from we talked about the bowl shape of the garden. So you're going to want to take the dimensions not from the top of the slope of the garden, but the bottom kind of bowl shape section. And that just kind of ensures that we're getting the volume that we require, so your garden's not constantly overflowing. The way that we calculated the rain events was, if you go on MOE, they have rain calculations that are kind of standard 90% events. So 90% of the time when rain falls in Peterborough, we get about 27 millimeters of rain. So that's the calculation that we use to establish the volume based on the area of your roof, if that makes sense. So it's just a straight up volume calculation. 1.5 is the target to get the full $500.
Thanks very much, Curtis. So next step in this process, and this will be part of the application for a rain garden subsidy, you're going to want to make sure you do a soil drainage test. So before you undergo this, make sure that you have called or submitted an application through Ontario One Call, because you want to make sure you know where those utilities are before you dig. So make sure you have all of those located before you even try this step. This step, I will say, is not terribly difficult, but it is somewhat time consuming. So make sure you have a couple of hours set aside to do the soil drainage test. You're going to need a variety of different items, such as a shovel. A tarp is to make it look nice. If you don't really care about having soil on your yard, then you can skip having a tarp. You're going to want to have some way of measuring the depth of the hole that you're going to dig, as well as the width of the hole. So usually a ruler or measuring tape. You're also going to need to mark how high the water is at the beginning. So you're going to want to have a stick from your property or a toothpick, and then you're going to want to have a timer. So to do the soil drainage test, what you'll do is you will have your utilities located, make sure you have all that paperwork in place. You will dig a hole, usually it's 8 or 9 inches deep, 8 or 9 inches wide, and then you're going to fill up the hole with water and let it drain. So that's step one, the idea being to saturate the soil so that it's already wet when you actually begin the test. And then when you do your soil drainage test, you're going to fill up the hole, mark with your toothpick or stick where the top of the water line is. And then I usually time every 10 or 15 minutes and see how far that water has drained. And you're just going to want to make sure that the water is draining relatively quickly. If it's not, then you might have clay, which would be a little bit unusual in Peterborough, but that would be a bit more of an issue. So the soil drainage test is mostly to determine what kind of soil you have and to make sure that the water that will be coming into your property in your rain garden will be able to drain. So next steps, we have a workshop again on June 17th at 7 p.m. Curtis, Heather, and I will all be there. And this one is mandatory for those who would like to receive a subsidy from the city. And this workshop will be going into a lot more detail of how to design a rain garden and how to install it. So very much the nitty gritty of how to get that rain garden in place on your property. At this time, I will let Heather take the reins, and Curtis and I will be here to answer the live Q&A questions. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen and Curtis. That was a lot of information, so I really appreciate you explaining it in such a great way. We had a few questions that came in through registration, so we'll start with a couple of those. But if you do have questions that you have, please enter them in the chat box. If you don't feel comfortable being outed that it's a question from you, feel free to just message me directly. You can switch the two in the chat box from everyone to just send it to me. So don't fret. There's no judgment here. All questions are valid questions. So some of the questions we got in through registration are really great questions. So I'm really excited to ask them. So question number one, Jen and Curtis. I have a soggy yard and accumulated water during rains in spring. Will a rain garden help drain water from my yard?
Do you want me to take that one? Yeah, I can take that one. Thanks. Yeah, okay, so it really depends on the grading of your lot. So if you have a soggy yard, depends on kind of where the high point and the low point are. If you have a bunch of water that's kind of stagnant in one section of your yard, and you wanted to, say, drain it towards a rain garden and have it infiltrate, that might help some of the section of your lot that is kind of getting saturated. For the purposes of the subsidy, we're dealing with more roof areas, so you'd have to be installing the rain garden downstream of a downspout like we spoke about for the purposes of this. But that might be an option to look at just in general. If you have soggy sections of your yard, you might be able to cut in a swale into a rain garden, something like that might help you out.
Thanks, Curtis. Jen, was there anything you wanted to add?
I will add that we have installed rain gardens on soggy areas of property, but again, it's really important to know what your soil is like. We've not installed rain gardens on clay, and that's usually not recommended, but if it's just soggy seasonally in the spring and in the fall, and it's 10 meters away from your house, that could be potentially a good spot for a rain garden.
That's great. Thanks, Jen. Somewhat, linked to that is this idea of kind of who's there to help. This is can feel like a daunting undertaking. And so we did have a question that said, although I'm very interested in this project, I don't have the expertise in creating a rain garden. Would there be help? Jen, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I will say the next workshop on June 17th will be about rain garden design and installation. So the idea with that one is that we will really walk through the steps of the process of designing a rain garden and installing it on your property. And I'm also here to answer questions. We do not at this time conduct site visits, but we can do phone calls or email, depending on the needs of the individual who's interested in the program.
That's great. Thanks, Jen. We have done a lot of rain garden installations with homeowners and volunteers, including children. And both Jen and I and a few other staff members at Green Up are certified rain garden masters. So we are all here to help. So and Curtis is also available and has said that you can contact him if you have questions about the online technicality of the pre-application, the pre-approvals and application. So I think between all of us, we have you covered. So we can definitely help with any of the questions that you have to make sure, because our goal at the end of this is to make sure that the gardens that are going in are doing their job. That's what we want to see. So that's what we're here to do. There's a question in the chat box. So I'm just going to pull that one up next. I am unsure if the topography of my yard will work. Do you do site visits? So Jen, do you want to, you've already said we don't do site visits, capacity and COVID reasons, but between Curtis and Jen, then how else would you recommend for folks to check the topography of their yard?
So Curtis, I'll
Yeah.
turn this over to you in a second.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about slope on property.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Right now? Yep.
Yeah.
So we have a section outlined in the rain garden application guide. So essentially what it is, and it's kind of outlined there, and you can do this in multiple areas of your property if you're kind of unsure of where water is going to flow. So basically what you do is you either take a string line or a meter stick, and you just set it at the high end of the slope, and then you take a ruler or tape measure, and you just hold that string line or that meter stick level, and then you see what the elevation difference is, and then you can do a quick rise over run calculation, which will determine the slope. So an easier way to determine where the water is flowing, if you don't want to break out the ruler and everything like that, is you can just take a full bucket of water, and on the downspout that you're considering, you can just take a full bucket of water and dump it near that downspout and just kind of watch where that water is going to flow, and that'll give you an indication of where the water is going to flow from that downspout and if it's going to go to the proposed location of your rain garden.
That's great. Thank you so much. A classic water test.
Yeah, very scientific.
It is, you know, and we often do that. We often do that on site before we put in rain gardens and also after we put it in. So it's a great test to make sure that the water is going where you thought you were sending it. Thank you for that. Just a couple more questions. If you're having questions pop into your head, please don't hesitate to drop them into the chat box. There's another question that we have here regarding hiring of contractors. So Curtis, you already mentioned this a little bit, but will the cost of hiring a contractor and/or landscape architect be covered through the subsidy?
Yeah, and the answer is yes to that. So at the end of the day, we just want as many rain gardens to go in as possible. So we're up to a maximum of 50. So if you have friends that are interested, please let them know. But it's still material, like we're just paying for material. What we didn't want was we just didn't want people going out and getting a new tool paid for through this. We wanted to kind of go towards the actual garden itself. So yeah, if you have a landscaper, they're going to end up using material. Just keep the receipt. If the landscaper could even give you a receipt that kind of has a material breakdown, and just kind of keep that and submit that with your application, that still counts.
That's great. Thank you. Another question that we have here is, how are rain garden designs approved? You went through the process, you did the workshop with us, you've created your design, you send that along into cyberspace, and then how do those actually get approved or not? So I'll leave that up.
So yeah, once you're done the pre-approval process, like I said, you're going to be sent a link with 2 upload sections. So one's going to be the actual design section. So that's what Jen's going to help you with at the workshop that they're hosting on the 17th. So that's the design sheet has the actual drainage test results, as well as a section where you're just going to draw the slope right on there. So you're going to submit that document, and then you're also going to submit the aerial photo tool. There's a print option on the tool. It walks you through it on the video that I've created. So those are the only 2 documents. And once we've had a chance to kind of look at those and we've determined, okay, they have the right size, we're on the same page as far as the estimate goes, you'll be notified to go ahead and start the actual install process.
That's great. Thank you, Curtis. Just a couple more questions, and if we get more in the chat box, then that's good as well. What is the best way to create a rain garden in a yard with existing sod? How do I kill the sod? What do I do with that sod? Jen?
Well, there are a number of ways that one can do this, depending on your budget, your time, and what your goals are for removing the sod. So probably the easiest option, but also the most expensive, is to hire a contractor. And as Curtis mentioned, the program does not cover the costs of the contractor digging for you. So that would be incurred by you as a homeowner, but it would get it done quickly. So that's always good. The contractor in that case would be responsible for making sure they have all the utilities located as well. So that's one option. Another option is my personal favorite, where you take cardboard. Usually if you have cardboard boxes, you'll save those. And you want to make that cardboard flat and single layer. Put it down on top of the sod that you want to kill, and put soil and mulch on top, or even just mulch. But that takes quite some time to kill the sod underneath. We're talking 4 to 6 weeks. If it's very hot, you might be more on the 4-week end of things. So that would be a little bit quicker, but still rather time consuming. And then there are tools out there for sod skimming as well. Lee Valley has one model, but there are others out there too. That can be a bit laborious, but it is an option out there for you as well.
That's great, thanks. I've also left just a resource or link in the chat box. It is the Green Up Sustainability Landscaping Guide from our Sustainable Urban Neighborhoods program. And that guide does have a solid page on sod removal, including a wonderful recipe that goes along with what Jen was saying about how to layer on top of that. So you can gain that recipe through that resource. So it's free, it's online, check it out. And our final question of the night thus far is, do rain gardens aid in the breeding of mosquitoes? Jen is our aquatic biologist, so I'm going to throw this question to her.
I've been doing some research on this one, and also I have installed, I'm going to say 14 rain gardens already in the last several years. Rain gardens are not breeding ground for mosquitoes. The reason for this is that the water is intended to drain within the rain garden in 24 to 48 hours. And if it was breeding grounds for mosquitoes, the water would need to sit quite a bit longer. So for a mosquito as an adult to lay an egg, for that egg to hatch into a larva, develop into a pupa, and then become an adult again, that takes 7 to 10 days, which is much longer than the period of time that the rain garden will actually have water in it. So no, rain gardens are not breeding ground for mosquitoes, which is great. And instead, they provide excellent habitat for predators of mosquitoes, such as birds and other insects like dragonflies that might eat those nasty pests.
That is great. What a relief that there's no real negatives to installing these rain gardens. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much. If there's any other questions, please feel free to jot it down into the chat box there. Jen and Curtis, if you both want to just jot your contact emails in the chat box there so folks have that. It's also available on the websites as well. And so if you are finding yourself, thinking about this over the next few days and you have some questions, please feel free to email Jen. Jen's kind of the go-to for inquiries on the program and on rain gardens. And then we can get some answers to you that way as well. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Sorry, I'm on an iPad, so it's cmei@peterborough.ca.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. As we said, this will be shared on the website so that others in the community who are interested in finding out more can learn from this experience as well. And please go ahead and jot down the next date of the next workshop, June 17th at 7 p.m. Jot that down on your calendar now so you don't forget. There will be pre-registrations required as well, just for security and safety of the Zoom meeting. And so we kind of know who's joining us. So please pre-register for that. It's going to be a wonderful, intense, deep learning experience that Jen and I are going to help you with. Curtis is going to help us as well with those technical bits, but you'll definitely learn from start to finish how you're going to be able to put in that rain garden as well. So Again, just a reminder that if you are planning to receive the subsidy, that next workshop is mandatory. We will be offering that workshop again in the fall as well. So as you go through this process, tell your friends, tell everyone you know, share it on social media. You can follow the City of Peterborough's Twitter and Facebook, Curtis?
Yeah, there's a Facebook as well, yeah.
That's right. And you can follow Green Up on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So we will be posting all of the wonderful information as we go. So feel free to share that along. And yeah, you are able to apply at any time. There's no deadline at the moment. So share it along and encourage others to do it too. And then if it is past the June 17th, that is okay. Please still sign up. Tell your friends to sign up, and we will host another workshop in the fall. So no one will be left behind. So if there isn't any further questions, and I don't see any more in the chat box, then we will end our workshop today. Thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your really great questions. And we look forward to working with you on your rain gardens.